I guess in my 52-year railroad career, I have walked to the moon and back on railroad platforms just like this in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And I've come to know there are a lot of untold stories and even a few secrets out there involving the railroad industry. Please join us and subscribe so we can continue to bring you those untold stories and even a few secrets from America's railroad past.
All aboard! Highball it, Eagle!
Have you heard the travel news about the Eagle Way? To your destination happening every day. The Texas Eagle is clicking on the rail. From the Windy City to the Alamo, meet you at the station, come on, let's go. People get ready and catch the wave. Catch the wave, the Texas Eagle Way. Through the heart of the nation of travel.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to my podcast. I've seen some trains before. Griff Hubbard here once again. We're honored to have each and every one of you with us. I've got one of the finest gentlemen with whom I ever worked, a friend now of 5 decades. That doesn't seem possible, but it is correct. Conductor Jeffrey Lynn Westbrook of the Missouri Pacific Railroad. And Jeff, I'd like to begin your story at the very beginning, and I want to introduce it this way. You're from Gurdon, Arkansas originally, or your family was. And that was, your mother was, and that was also the hometown of George T. Graham, the legendary general manager of the Missouri Pacific Railroad. I'm sure you heard this too, that George T. Graham, GTG, actually stood for greater than God. And, there were a few people who had encounters with him who might have believed that once or twice. And also the hometown of R.K. Davidson, Richard K. Davidson, who not only became president of the Missouri Pacific Railroad, but chairman of the board of the Union Pacific Railroad before his retirement. So here's what I want to start out by asking you. I remember ABC National News doing a story in Texarkana when George H.W. Bush and Ross Perot and Bill Clinton were all three running for president at the same time. And the reason they chose Texarkana is because it was kind of equidistant between Little Rock and Dallas. And the question asked around town was, why do you think 3 people are running for president of the United States who are all from within the same 250-mile radius? Which was a pretty good question, and there were many different answers. So my question to you is, why do you think Gurdon, Arkansas produced the high-level railroad executive level folk that it did? Any guesses? Any thoughts?
Yes. And a lot of this came from my mother's point of view, her living there, and my grandparents and my uncle, her over 2-year older brother. You would think a small town like Gurdon, just looking at it and not knowing that it was a railroad town or anything, you're just looking at it on a map and the population, you would say, well, that's just another small Arkansas burg, just another small town. Well, that wasn't really so, because of the Missouri Pacific Railroad having a line that went down to El Dorado, ultimately down to Monroe, Louisiana, and tapping onto the paper mills at Camden, the oil fields at Smackover and Norphlet, and the chemical industry that all of that produced down around the El Dorado area, had that branch. Then you had the branch going out of there up to Norman, Arkansas, which is north of Glenwood, about 65 miles up there through the piney woods, serving sawmills, a quarry that they quarried out and made roofing granules up there, and several other small businesses. And they had because of the distance between Little Rock and Texarkana, they had a small roundhouse there, a car shop, and had respective extra boards for trainmen and enginemen there. And the schools there were really second to none. They had some awfully good schools, and the expectations of parents was pretty high. So to answer your question, that this was this town was on a little higher level than a lot of the other small towns in Arkansas. And therefore it turned out a lot of railroad men that sought higher, a lot did not seek higher positions. A lot stayed in train and engine service. Some section men in the maintenance of way, they stayed around. Now a lot, whenever they started cutting those jobs off, they had to migrate other places on the railroad or find other jobs somewhere else. But that, to answer your question, that is the reason Gurdon was pretty important.
You know what? I can't think of any names at this second, but if memory serves me, there were other officials from Gurdon besides Mr. Davidson and Mr. Graham, weren't there? Some people that I can't think.
Ray Tucker was one.
Ray Tucker, superintendent.
Yes, and I think he went on to be actually a assistant general manager, or maybe a general manager. I'm not positive, but he rose on up there. Like I say, there's several more that came out of there that went on to be higher up officials. And by the way, George T. Graham's nickname was Sonny.
So that's right.
That's what Mother always called him. And he is the one that got me hired.
Well, tell us that story. Tell us, first of all, tell us what year we're talking about. Here's the question I really want to ask. Is going to work for the railroad something that you knew you wanted to do at an early age?
I did.
Let me briefly interject. Surprisingly to me, in doing these podcasts so far, almost to a man, everybody has that answer. And I don't know why I was expecting to hear, no, it really never crossed my mind. It was just a fluke. But so you're no different than the rest of us. You knew at an early age, I want to go to work for the railroads. Right. Please continue.
And then working with, as I got to know my other fellow workmates out there, other conductors and brakemen and enginemen, you could tell right quick the ones that were there strictly for the job.
Surely.
They did not have a lot of interest in railroad history or, they didn't embrace the whole railroad. They were there, they did their job, and they went home. So you probably are never going to run into anybody that's going to sit in this seat I'm sitting in right now to tell a story, because basically they don't care. They don't. The railroad was a means to an end. It was a means just to make money and go home. And those of us, railroading can be, and it's pretty. It'll consume your life quite a bit.
Amen.
Because of the nature of the working hours and the times and all of that. But and different people got more consumed than others. There were some eccentrics out there that all they wanted to do was stay out there and work.
That
was fine with them. I mean, I try to find and most most guys did, try to find a happy medium. You know, yeah, we liked it, enjoyed it. We had a good fellowship, good time, and then went home and took care of family business. But some of those men, they didn't do that.
Well, we're going to talk about some of those eccentrics you and I encountered, and there are a couple of 2 or 3 good stories in that we will explore here shortly. Okay, give us the year and your mom picking up the phone and calling her friend Sonny Graham, who would have been general manager by then, I think.
He was, and I had quit school in December of '73, quit college. I'd come disenchanted, and I just had the railroad on my mind, and come home, and Dad and Mom said, "Well, what are you gonna do?" Dad worked out at Alcoa there at Bauxite, and said, "You want to come back out to plant?" I had worked out there briefly for a little while, and
the Alcoa aluminum plant at Bauxite, Arkansas.
Yeah, which big customer of Missouri Pacific UP.
Yes, sir. Yes, big, sir.
But I said, "No, I want to work railroad." She said, "Mother said, are you sure?" She said, "Yeah." She said, this was like 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. She said, "Okay." Went over and picked up the phone. She had his number and called him up and said, "Sonny, this is Joy Westbrook." Said, "My son Jeff here wants to work on railroad." He said, "Let me speak to him." So she gave me the phone. He said, "Your name Jeff?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Why you want to work on the railroad?" I said, "Well, I said, my grandfather, who you knew," I said, "he was a lifelong Rock Island employee, and the only reason that I got to know him there in Gurdon is he was cut off so many years during the Depression that they moved out there where family was and moved into Gurdon." But he said, "Well," he said, "you don't you want to go in our trainee program?"
Yeah, the famous Missouri Pacific Management Trainee Program.
Yeah,
Yes.
He asked me if I want to do that. I said, "No, sir, I want to be a brakeman." He paused. He said, "Okay." He said, "Go down there to the main office tomorrow. Go to Mr. J.B. McCormick's office." And he said, he'll be waiting on you. I said, "Okay." And then I gave the phone back to Mo, and they finished the conversation. And I did exactly that. They hired me the next day. And they sent me over to a trainmaster's office, Mr. H.N. Kirby, an older gentleman. We called him Boss Kirby. He had a secretary that he shared with the superintendent over there at the time. And he brought me back there, and he gave me the Missouri Pacific Rule Book, General Code of Operating Rules. He gave me the green safety rule book. He gave me a blue, I think it was, radio rule book.
Right.
And he gave me a metal conger, lantern, and a Missouri Pacific switch key.
Right.
And I had a piece of paper the secretary gave me, and they had all these different student trips lined out here. He said, "You go make these student trips, get that conductor signature. When you get through with these, you come back here, we'll mark you up."
Ladies and gentlemen, as a brief aside, when Jeff and I first went to work for the railroad, your first 5 trips were free of charge. Now, let me explain what that means. That means your first 5 trips were on you. You did not get paid until beginning on the 6th trip and thereafter.
I had 10.
10 free trips.
10 free trips, yeah.
Well, I'm glad I went to work on the Texas and Pacific then, because they only required 5 free trips. Okay.
These were 10. Now, some of them were round trips, which
I got it.
Which went for 2. They considered that too. Like went to El Dorado and back. That was fortuitous because we got down there on the El Dorado branch and we met the northbound job, and the conductors let me swap out where we met
Right.
down there at Luann, down there at Luann, Arkansas. Had a long side when we met, so I got back on that, come on back to North Little Rock. I didn't have to stay in El Dorado, so that was really, really a fortuitous thing right there. But we tried to I got those trips made as quick as I could, got all the signatures and went back up there and they checked them out. And I'll never forget, Griff, a lot of the conductors would write on comments, and this was their favorite thing. I think they just all said, called willing and learning.
Okay.
Willing and learning on there. But then I went back over to that main office there and handed them the slip, and they made the call over to the crest where the big extra board was and marked me up. The caller turned around and called me and said, "You're being forced on the Gurdon extra board." I never made it.
Well, at least you were home. At least a home base for the extra board. Maybe you weren't ever there, but at least your extra board was home base. Tell me something, Jeff. In 73, you would have begun to hear the first rumblings of possible Amtrak service returning to the Missouri Pacific Railroad, I'm going to guess.
Did.
Was there excitement? Was there, I don't know, we're going to have to put up with that pattern. I'm talking about among the men. What was the talk? Were people happy about it, or consternation about seniority? What was the deal?
Those old men, you couldn't tell lots of times if they were happy or what, but because they'd say, if they're going to put that passenger train on, I think I can hold one of those 3 jobs. That's the kind of tones they're talking. But yeah, right. That they were masking kind of a little bit of elation that they were going to, because see, it had the last Missouri Pacific passenger train ended there at Texarkana in May of 71, correct?
May 1st, 1971, correct?
Yeah. Okay. From then until March of 74.
That's correct.
No trains. And let me say something about that. I was explaining this to my wife yesterday. I said, okay, up to that time, those Missouri Pacific passenger train out of St. Louis to Texarkana, I said, by timetable, 79 mile per hour. Not even a little 2 years later, they put passenger train back on. What do they do? Restricted to 60. And you know that the Missouri Pacific Railroad had not deteriorated enough to warrant that. But that was the railroad.
We're going to talk
getting back at and say they didn't want it anyway. So
we're going to talk about a couple of those stories there, but 2 quick things, ladies and gentlemen, as an aside. Number one, Conductor Westbrook and I can attest to the fact that the Missouri Pacific Railroad was some of the finest railroad infrastructure in the world in 1974. And we can also attest to the fact, and a couple of 2 or 3 of them probably got disciplined, at least they did on the T&P end of it, but 60 miles an hour was not always adhered to on the passenger train in those days. So, Jeff, was okay. So you yourself, even though being new in seniority, meaning only about a year here or less, you must have entertained thoughts about going to the passenger extra board for Amtrak work yourself.
I did. Okay, on that magical evening of March the 13th, 1974, I was working.
It was a Wednesday night, Thursday morning. Yes.
Yes, I was working the 10 p.m. Gurdon switcher. We were at Gum Springs, which is about
what switcher were you working?
The 10 p.m. Gurdon traveling
10 o'clock. 10 o'clock Gurdon switcher.
10 o'clock p.m. Yes, 10 o'clock p.m. So we left Gurdon and went to Arkadelphia and switched to Arkadelphia and Gum Springs, the Reynolds Metals reduction plant there at Gum Springs, which was up on a hill, and it had a clear view nearly all the way to the Arkadelphia depot, which was a distance probably about 4 or 5 miles. And,
yeah, that's a long distance. You must have been up on a hill.
We were up on that hill. It was a clear night, and we were switching around up there, and I noticed way over there in the distance what I perceived looked like some kind of flashing light, and I wasn't sure what it was. I was aware, by the way, that the 21 was his inaugural run was that night, but we had work to do, and I didn't. Time gets away, and I didn't know exactly when it was. So, but I saw it flashing light, and the big long straightaway leaving Arkadelphia Depot all the way nearly down to Gum Springs before you get in this curve. And it's like I said, that's on our railroad. And fortuitously, we came down off the hill down to that little yard that was back down by the main line, and it was perfect timing. Got down there, and I actually got to see 21 roar by that. Well, by then it was AM of the 14th.
Right.
That's when it was. And and I just said to myself, I'm going to see about working pasture work when I can. I said to myself right then, I wanted to. Well, I got released about 2 months later from the Gurdon Extra Board. First thing I did when I reported in up there at North Little Rock at the caller's office, they marked me up on the south end Little Rock to Texarkana freight board, and I inquired about going on the passenger extra board. Caller Leota, she put me right on it. Of course, I was the most junior man on there, but I didn't care. I wanted to get my piece of it,
Right, and just like in the Missouri Pacific days, a housekeeping question I'd like to ask. Did you have a freight conductor's date and a passenger conductor's seniority date, or were they the same?
One and the same.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Because the generation before you had 2 separate dates. They had a freight conductor's date and a passenger conductor, but by our time, it was the same seniority date.
And I'll add something else, Rip. They had consolidated the north end and the south end in passenger work.
What does that? Tell us what that means.
Missouri Pacific seniority was, you had out of North Little Rock, you had the runs that went to Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and then you had the runs that went to Texarkana. And each subdivision, you had the Little Rock subdivision and the Hoxie subdivision. And each one of those had its own seniority district. Even though you were all Arkansas division, you had separate seniority districts.
Oh, okay.
But for passenger, it was dovetail. In other words, you strictly went by your date, your hire on date as a brakeman and as a conductor. So a man that worked his regular work he was on a freight job going to Poplar Bluff. If a passenger job going to Texarkana came up that he wanted to work either temporarily or full time, if he was the oldest man to bid on it, he would get it. So the passenger work was, as we called it on the railroad, dovetail. All the dates were like this. There was no demarcation. It was all the same.
Understood. Okay, that brings us up to a more obscure question here that I've always wanted to understand the details of, and you can provide that enlightenment. At Texarkana Yard, where I first went to work on the transcontinental division of the Texas and Pacific Railway from Texarkana west toward Bonham and Fort Worth, and also in Texarkana Yard proper, we had the west end of the yard, which was the T&P yard, Texas and Pacific Railway yard, and the north end of the yard, which was the Missouri Pacific yard. And whereas switchman and brakeman had joint seniority, whether you were working as a switchman on the west end at Texarkana or the north end, although let me make a brief footnote here. If you were a T&P employee working at the north end of Texarkana yard, you filled out a Texas and Pacific Railway time slip, whereas your conductor or foreman may have filled out a Missouri Pacific time slip. But the reason that I already knew all of the engineers who in later years were to come to work for Amtrak, the reason I knew the vast majority, if not all of them, I had worked with them as switch engineers out on the north end of Texarkana yard prior to Amtrak service. So that's a long roundabout way to say, why didn't they just call an engineer off the extra board at Texarkana to work a switch engine job in Texarkana yard? Where did those engineers come from, and how come it was that way?
They came from the North Little Rock Engineers Extra Board or the Gurdon Engineers Extra Board, depending on availability. And much to the consternation of most of those engineers, because they either lived at North Little Rock or lived in the Gurdon area, they'd have to drive all the way to Texarkana to protect a north end engineer's job there at the Texarkana yard. But I don't know. That's just one of those old work rule contracts that prevailed, I guess, until they did a big change up down there, I guess. But that's all I ever knew, because I remember a lot of those younger engineers complaining a lot about having to go protect a north end Texarkana job,
And if I'm not misremembering, an Arkansas division engineer in an emergency could get called for a West End T&P job at Texarkana. And when he did that, his paycheck for that one trip, or however many it was, came from the T&P Railway and not the Missouri Pacific Railroad. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
I thought I was remembering. I never drew a Missouri Pacific paycheck. All of my paychecks were drawn on the Texas and Pacific Railway, the Republic National Bank at Dallas, Texas. But I couldn't help but notice so many people I was working with sometimes on the same job, their paycheck said the Missouri Pacific Railroad, the Boatman's Bank of St. Louis. So,
those,
you know what? The payroll department must have been labor intensive on the Missouri Pacific lines at St. Louis.
Oh, it was. I think all of the payroll departments at North Little Rock and St.Louis and Fort Worth, and they had to have been. My goodness, there was so many T&E people to deal with. It was magical.
Okay, so the north end of Texarkana yard, whereas switchmen came from the Texarkana extra board, be it Missouri Pacific or Texas and Pacific, but the engineers on those jobs all came from the Gurdon or North Little Rock engineers extra boards.
Correct.
Let me ask you a test question. I bet you know the answer to this. You remember how we got our paychecks every 2 weeks? Now, do you remember how they got to North Little Rock and to Texarkana and to every other stop?
Well, I know this. I got my check handed to me by the agent at Benton. I'd go down there and get my paycheck, and he'd go over to the safe and then he'd have them all written down with the check number, and he'd check my name off, or at the time, or and if you signed a little thing where your wife could, or other
Sure,
designee to come and get it,
sure.
get your check. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I remember getting my first paychecks was there at Benton.
Any clue how they got to Benton?
I guess I don't know. I never thought about it. I assume
Every 2 weeks, remember the hottest when you and I went to work, the hottest train on the railroad was St. Louis to El Paso number 61.
yes,
And you did not delay number 61. In fact, it was in the employee timetable that you didn't make movements ahead of number 61, if you'll remember.
you did.
Every 2 weeks, the payroll department at St. Louis took a big leather pouch and took it down and put it on the caboose of number 61 with all the paychecks for North Little Rock, for Poplar Bluff, all the way to Longview. Now, if it had Dallas, I'm not qualified. But if you were anywhere between St. Louis and Longview, you got your checks every 2 weeks out of that mail pouch in the caboose on number 61.
Well, you have told me something I did not know.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We were always if memory serves me, number one used to hit Texarkana early in the morning, I think. Daylight, but early morning hours. And I just remember everybody paid very close attention that leather pouch marked Texarkana got off.
I'm sure they did.
of number 61's caboose.
Yeah.
Okay, so Amtrak is up and running on the Arkansas division.
Correct.
Let me tell you, from Gurdon, Arkansas, one of the finest gentlemen I ever had the privilege to meet and know and work with in my whole life, the original Missouri Pacific / Amtrak conductor, J.N. Horn, Neil Horn. What a gentleman.
My first Amtrak trip, he was the conductor on September the 5th, 1975.
Wow.
Sure was. He was my first Amtrak conductor. And a lot of people had warned me about him. We got along great. We really did.
Fine man.
Each of a guy.
Yeah. You know what? Whatever y'all had in the water at Gurdon, he had it in him. He was just that special guy. Do you remember, was your trip south or north, your first Amtrak trip?
Like I say,
I bet you're looking in your time book, aren't you?
Oh, I did my homework. I've got all my Amtrak trips right here. Went south on 21 on the 5th, came back on 22 on the 6th.
Okay. And so you and I would have, that puts the date, you and I would have first met in the late night, early morning hours of September 5th, 1975.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Because in those years, ladies and gentlemen, I was the agent at Texarkana, and Texarkana Union Station still had a passenger yard under the canopies. And it was not unusual to meet Amtrak trains numbers 21 and 22 in that passenger yard, and to have both trains there at the same time. And it it could be an interesting night. But Mr. Horn just personified a passenger conductor to me. He just was the best. And he and I remained friends well after he retired. He would come to Texarkana with his wife, and we'd go drinking and dancing at the VFW. So as most of those men that we're going to talk about, Jeff, you and I have talked about it so much over the years, those men had won World War II, and that's not a joke. They had won World War II and come home and made the transition from the steam locomotive to the diesel locomotive. And man, they were the world's greatest generation. They had, I want to talk about one in particular, a man that made such an impact on both of our lives. And I want to hear the story. In fact, you named your son after this man, but Lance G. Sullenberger. And God rest his soul, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Sullenberger did not like just everybody. His last name had a part of who he was in it. But for some reason, for which we will be eternally grateful, he liked Jeff Westbrook and he liked Griff Hubbard. And we became close to that old man. Tell me about Lance from your standpoint, Jeff, and how that's a pretty big deal to name your son after one of your coworkers. Tell us that story.
Well, there's another one that I'd, been warned about, the old man's gruff. He's kind of got a little mean streak in him or something. Well, I just always like to find out for myself about people. You in the back of your mind, you took a little note of what somebody else said, but anyway, when he found out, I guess my connection, who I was, because my mother and his younger sister, Lila Jane Sullenberger, were best of friends there in Gurdon. And when he found out that I was her son, I think it just, it made him feel good. At least here's some Gurdon descendants that are, that they're still out here on the railroad. There's still some coming in, That's just
so Lance Sullenberger was a Gurdon guy. Yeah. I don't think I knew that.
Yeah.
Okay. Another Gurdon personality. All right.
Yeah,
All right.
Sure is. But I saw right quick that key to Lance was do what he told you to do.
Right.
Do your job the way he wants it done. You do that, and everything's great. And when we would sit down a lot of times in the dining car, and he'd be working through some of that transportation, he took the time to show me. He and Paul Nelson were very. They wanted me to learn what they were doing. A lot of young men my age and stuff didn't, they didn't much give a hoot. And in fact, whenever they got called as conductor, they did the very minimal work in the transportation. But they all took the working the paperwork of the passenger train very seriously. And Lance was one of those people. So we became fast friends. And later on, when I was searching for a name for my son, right before he was born, I liked the name Lance. It seemed, a manly name. And because, Lance had been real nice to me, that's what we decided on. Certainly did. Now, my son's his first name is Jeffrey, the same as mine. Middle name is Lance, but that's what we call him, is Lance. I didn't want another Jeffrey, names. I didn't want to be Jeffrey here. I wanted, him to have his own identity. And that's how that came about.
And Lance Sullenberger knew of that you had named your son after him. And I remember him being so proud of that.
It did. And I was glad that he told me that, that I could tell he was very moved by it. He really was.
And true to his namesake, your son became a man of very high military rank in his career, did he not?
He retired from the Army, let's see here, a little over 2 years ago with the rank of lieutenant colonel, and very well-educated fella. He got a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University and a PhD from the University of Charleston, West Virginia.
Wow.
And
so he's Dr. Lance.
He is Dr. Lance.
Well, don't you know Lance Sullenberger loves that. Did you ever know, if I did know, I have forgotten, what did the G stand for in Mr. Sullenberger's name? Do you know? Was it Gerald? I don't know, I don't think.
No, because on the seniority roster, it just had the G on there. And a lot of men didn't want to be asked about their middle names sometimes. So
that's true.
I shied away from that.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I might tell a brief aside that our guest today is well aware of, but Mr. Sullenberger had a wry sense of humor. I won't say that it was out there smiling and laughing every second, but it was in there.
Mm-hmm.
And in those years, Amtrak trains number 21 and 22, the Inter-American, this is prior to its renaming as the Legacy train, the Texas Eagle. It was inaugurated as the Inter-American, St. Louis to Laredo, Texas, with the idea of going to Mexico City someday. None of that ever happened. The point of the story is it ran overnight between Dallas and Little Rock. So particularly the segments south and northbound between Little Rock and Texarkana were between midnight and 3 a.m. And Mr. Sullenberger was having difficulties with individuals in the chair cars, in the coaches, who were performing extracurricular amorous activities in the darkness of these coaches. And Mr. Sullenberger was an old prude, but neither was he really verbose, to just throw out words. But I do remember him telling me, well, it's kind of unmistakable, when the man is sitting in his coach seat facing the direction of movement of the train, and I walk through the car and the woman is sitting on his lap facing backward. It's just kind of self-evident what's going on here. And so, Mr. Sullenberger, the reason this, I'll try to keep it short, but this is a pretty big deal. Mr. Sullenberger found a joke in a Playboy magazine and cut it out and brought it to me. And the joke showed the co-pilot coming out of the cockpit of an airplane in flight and him encountering this same situation that Conductor Sullenberger was encountering on his trains. And the caption read, he leans into the gentleman and very discreetly, the co-pilot leads into the gentleman and says, "Pardon me, sir, but this is the non-effing section." Of course, the word spelled out. So Mr. Sullenberger said, when nobody's looking, go over to that yard office and Xerox me off about 100 copies of these. Now, the reason I tell that story to you younger folk, this won't mean anything, but in those days, a Xerox machine was considered, nuclear warfare technology. I mean, you just didn't get access to the railroad Xerox machine without going through the chief clerk or something. You just didn't walk in and start making copies. It was a huge deal. It was high tech and it was under lock and key. But I like to think, like any good railroad man, I found a way at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I Xeroxed him off. And we could have gotten in real trouble for this. This wasn't just a passing thing, probably not for the joke, but for using the Xerox machine for 100 copies would have been the deal. So I Xeroxed him off 100 copies, and maybe a couple of weeks went by, and I asked him, I said, he kept his extras there in the depot at Texarkana, he'd take 5 or 10 of them every trip. And I said, "How's this going?" And he said, "It's working like a charm." So I guess Mr. Sullenberger never had to say anything to anybody again. He just took his little conductor's pen light and handed that cartoon over to the gentleman, and it seemed to do the trick.
Yeah, that's Lance.
That was Lance Sullenberger, just a salt of the earth kind of a guy. I have some old conductor remittance sheets from the 40s from Texarkana Union Station. And guess whose signature is on some of them performing conductor remittances? Lance G. Sullenberger. So he earned his right to be out there.
He certainly did. Yes.
He was I'll just be briefly repetitious. I'm glad he liked us, Jeff, because he didn't like everybody.
No, see, that just shows you that two of Gordon's men there, Neil Horn and Lance Sullenberger, passenger conductors par excellence, both of them.
You got it. You got that. That brings up to what I want to ask you about. You know, the Amtrak official that hired me was a wonderful man out of St. Louis. And he had been passenger traffic manager on the Gulf, Mobile, and Ohio. One of the finest men I have ever known in my life. He, you know, when you rose to that rank under the railroad, under the Legacy Railroad banner, you know, you didn't get to be passenger traffic manager, out of the clear blue. You had to have a lot of experience. Yeah. But one of the things that he said to me was, and this is before the first run of Amtrak service. This is before March 13th, 1974, because I was actually hired on March the 8th, about 6 days before the first run. And he said, you know, I'm really concerned about the conductors out of Arkansas. And I was perplexed, you know, and I had to ask more questions. And he said, you know, he said, I'm not so much worried about the guys out of Texas. They will probably be more cosmopolitan or had more experience with the larger cities and bigger groups of people. He said, he did not say these words, but what he was conveying was he was worried about the Amtrak conductors out of Arkansas perhaps being country bumpkins. Now, those are my words, not his. This man was more highbrow than that. But anyway, I wanted to put it to you, not that we didn't love our friends out of Mineola and Fort Worth on the TNP side. They were some real characters. I mean, you got cowboys and Indians and a little bit of everything else. I mean, personalities TNT. Yeah. But isn't it funny, Jeff, the conductors, and I'm going to start naming a few, the conductors all out of Little Rock, North Little Rock, were just the epitome of a National Railroad passenger corps. I'm talking about in stature and demeanor and the way they carried themselves. You couldn't have asked for anything out of Hollywood Central Casting that wasn't better than what Little Rock and North Little Rock provided. And I name them: Paul F. Nelson, yeah, Leo and Noah Wingfield, Carl Watts, Burl Cornelius. You know, they were men. They just carried themselves in such a respectful demeanor. Paul Nelson in particularly comes to mind. He must have been a very fine man to work with.
I worked with him more than any conductor in my passenger work. And he was. Once again, he was one of those that expected his flagman to do the job that he's supposed to do. And he did that without, I guess, he did it in such a manner to where you wanted to do good for Paul. You wanted to do a good job, you know. And he was interesting to talk to. He had a lot of stories. A lot of people didn't know. Paul was kind of quiet, but he wasn't. Whenever he talked to someone he liked, he would tell had some good stories to tell. But
he did.
There were some characters out there. A man I remember named W.T. Clark. He would drive all the way up to Little Rock from Clark County and get down there. He was a Gurdon guy, and he'd worked a flagman job, and there at the last of his career. And I remember he always put his goggles. He had goggles, and he'd always look outside that Dutch door, and he'd have them goggles on. But he was a nice guy. He was a guy that he never promoted conductor.
Right. Like, so something you can't do anymore.
Oh no, they stopped that while way back there. But him and Harold Phillips was another.
Tell me a handsome Harold Phillips story. I want to in 1976, thank God, like a lot of other people, I got it into my head that I needed to have an afro. And I put a picture of myself in one of our podcasts. It's out there for anybody that wants to look at it. But the point of the story is I cannot repeat what handsome Harold Phillips had to say about my afro. I cannot. But
he was another character. He really was.
What was he a Gurdon man?
Actually, he was from Benton.
Benton, okay.
Yeah, he was Benton guy. And
he was one heck of a passenger conductor.
Oh, he was. He was another one that knew the business and was efficient. And I've always, expected his flagman to know where all the shorts were and to be when that train stopped. He wanted that step box on that platform and you helping the people off the minute that train stopped. As nearly all of those gentlemen did. That's what they expected. And that's what, to keep a train timely, that was part of it.
Let me tell that's right. That's where you made up time, was in the stations, was your dwell time.
Yes.
The least dwell time you had at the stations, the more chance you had to make up. Let me tell you a quick handsome Harold Phillips story. His wife once told me, I went, he died of kidney disease, which plagued him all of his adult life. But I'd gone to visit him in the Missouri Pacific Hospital at Little Rock, right across from the depot, kind of look down on the depot. I presume it's not there anymore.
No, I had I guess you would say, the pleasure or misfortune of spending the night there one time.
Oh no. We'll have to hear that story.
Yeah, that's something. But anyway.
But Miss Phillips said to me, she said, have you noticed Harold is the only one that refers to himself as handsome Harold Phillips? I wish he wouldn't do that anymore. Which kind of tickled me, because Harold would always introduce himself, H. Phillips, handsome Harold.
His nickname out there was Blinky.
Blinky, that's right. That's right.
He did this.
He did do that a lot.
With his mouth open.
Yep.
That was terrible.
That howdy doody mouth.
Yeah.
Sure did. But you know what I admired the most about him? Everybody seemed to take to the Amtrak uniform. But handsome Harold Phillips, I never saw him work a trip with anything but his Missouri Pacific conductor's cap.
Oh,
I never saw him with an Amtrak cap on.
He was proud of that that conical hat that the Missouri Pacific had. And, kind of like Zeb Love. Zeb always wore his.
Zeb said, as did the conductor in the 70s prior to Zeb, Boyd Pulliam always wore his TNP, TNP cap.
Yeah, they liked that hat, and nobody was about to tell them they couldn't wear it.
That and you know what? And no one did.
No,
which brings up the story of J.D. Young, and I want you to tell a J.D. Young story. His nickname was Gump, G-U-M-P, which I understand was a famous daily cartoon newspaper character of the 40s and 50s, maybe. Gump.
That's what I always heard. I don't recall the cartoon at all, but apparently
I think maybe I've seen it. But anyway, Gump, and I want you to tell your Gump story. I'm gonna lead it in with mine. J.D. Young, one of a kind, ladies and gentlemen, and he was prone to wear a football helmet because he was worried a chemical train, one of those chemical freight trains, was going to blow up, and he was going to be protected. And he had spray painted this one helmet, a personal spray paint job, not a professional. He'd spray painted it gold. And Jeff, you remember my old boss, Salt of the Earth, ex-Santa Fe man, just a wonderful man out of Fort Worth, Neil Wright.
Yeah.
And Neil was at Texarkana doing an audit of my operation. And 21 and 22 both were in the station at the same time. A lot of hubbub of activity going on. And he doesn't know Gump like we know Gump. And he sees Gump headed to the baggage car. Gump had been in the baggage machine. I don't ever remember J.D. Young working as conductor. I could be wrong, but I can't imagine that.
No.
But he had been in the baggage job, and he was getting up on the baggage car. And in one hand, he didn't have it on his head yet, but under one arm, he had that gold football helmet. And on the other arm, he had a big fluffy pillow. And God bless Neil Wright's soul. Neil made the mistake of saying, say, fella, you're not taking that pillow up there to sleep on the job, are you? And J.D. Young turned right around to Neil Wright. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, Neil being one of the most religious and thoughtful, genteel Christian men I've ever known, who would not be prepared for this. And Gump turned to him and said, well, if you goddamn son of a bitches would put the baggage car on the rear end instead up here next to the engine, then the baggage man like me could get some sleep between here and Poplar Bluff. I could see the wheels turning in Neil's head. And I wasn't about to miss this, whatever I was doing, I slowed down so I could stay close.
Yeah. And viewers, try to picture this little skinny, drawn up man. If good bit wind come up, it'd blow him away. But he was tough cookie. He really was. And every time he ever talked about anything that at length, and I'm sure during that particular conversation, his eyes would water.
Indeed.
He would start talking and his eyes would water. In other words, and that even made him a little more intimidating, because you said, I don't know what I'm going about this fellow here. It's unpredictable, and he kind of was, but he was a good man, but he was very, very strange, man. He's the only man I ever witnessed there at Locust Street at North Little Rock. I was called off the export to go with him to Texarkana on one of our premier piggyback trains, the CHZ, and he said, and walked in there, and I said, I'm here, Mr. Young. Okay, he said, we're called to go out on this all day son of a bitch. And the only time I've ever heard a man cuss, because we were called for one of the premier piggyback trains, nearly guaranteed a very short, good trip to Texarkana. But that day, nothing was going to please him. In other words, that day, if he'd had a chariot from heaven come down, he was going to have something to say about it. But that's kind of one of my little stories about it. And I worked with him other times on freight and such, and he one of a kind, that's for sure.
Well, I could see at that very moment, I could see the wheels turning in Neil Wright's head, and I was not about to miss this. They were face to face, and I want you to know Neil did the smart thing. Neil was a man of wisdom and introspection. Neil turned around and went back into the ticket office, and not another word was ever said. Because I think Neil sized it up. This is a battle I will never wait. This is just let this go.
This little man.
And I think I think I told you the most frightening automobile ride I've ever been in my life. I rode I was up there for some Amtrak business. I can't tell you why, but I rode from the Crest Yard in North Little Rock back down to the Amtrak station in Little Rock with J.D. Young driving. It was one of the most make no mistake, the most frightening event. The man was not a driver, but he did do this. He did wear a cap that always said Toadsuck Ferry, Arkansas, which is a place, yes, which does exist. And I remember I remember Conductor Carl Watts, another fine, fine gentleman, telling me, he said, Gump goes up there to Toadsuck Ferry and fishes with his mama. And he said, when they're both in the boat and you can't see around the bend, you don't know who's talking. He said, they both curse equally. And you don't know if it's him cursing or his mama cursing unless you round the bend and see who's talking, because they sound alike.
No, that I hadn't heard that either.
Yes, sir.
Oh my goodness.
Sir,
Oh,
let's talk about your memories of Maurice Steenburgen. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, famous Hollywood actress Mary Steenburgen's father. Jeff and I had the privilege to work with that man, Arkansas Division, passenger conductor. He was always Hoss Steenburgen to us, but I always called him Maurice sometimes. But another fine gentleman. Tell us a Maurice story.
well, he was working baggage. This particular first time I think I ever worked with him. And I was flagman. I can't even remember who the conductor was, but he I don't know if we were in Little Rock or what, but I walked by and he said, "Hey," he said, "come up here and help me with all this stuff on this trailer here. I need some help." And I said, "Okay." And that's how we met, pretty much. And we got along fine. He could be a little, I don't know how to say it. He always kind of gave me the aura. He was kind of want to be authoritative a little bit, but we got along fine. I think I only at one time I worked with him, I think a total of 3 times. So I really haven't got a whole lot of stories about Maurice, not at all.
One thing that I saw his co-workers do, the world's greatest generation, I saw the Wingfields and the Paul Nelsons and the Carl Wattses do for him. After Maurice Steenburgen, Hoss Steenburgen, had his heart attack, he never lifted another heavy bag after he came back. His crew took care of him. Consequently, we took care of him. If it was heavy or something a little bit untoward, we just got up in that baggage car and handled it for him. And, we were visiting about this story last week, Jeff, but I remember because of his daughter. His daughter at that time was married to the actor Malcolm McDowell. And Hoss and Miss Steenburgen had been invited to the premiere, whatever year this would have been in the mid-70s, to Saturday Night Fever with front row seats, the Hollywood premiere. I mean, the big deal. And I just remember thinking, and he wasn't gone that long. He was gone the train only ran tri-weekly in those days. So he didn't miss very many trips. But if memory serves me, I remember his last trip was on a Wednesday night and he was back to work on Monday morning. And I just remember thinking, I wonder how many people on this train would believe me if I said, see this baggage man up here? He just rubbed elbows with John Travolta and all of the stars of Saturday Night Fever at the premiere. Actually, I think the premiere of that show was in San Francisco and not Hollywood. That's another part of history. But regardless, he had been with them all, and because of her association with Bill and Hillary Clinton from all of those years back to President Clinton's gubernatorial days. There may be more than one, but Hoss Steenburgen is the only passenger conductor I've ever known who had a United States president attend his funeral. So
that is something, it really is. And another little tidbit here you may not know. Carol Phillips' daughter, Mary Nell, was one of Mary Steenburgen's best friends in North Little Rock in school. They graduated together.
That, you know what? I knew that and had long since forgotten. That's right. And
Yeah.
and I bet they're still friends.
They are. She married a guy that I was in class with here at Benton, Greg Thomas. But they live on a big farm outside of, going south on Highway 67 toward Nowell. But yeah, I'm sure that they still are. But yeah, it's another little tidbit to that, and that kind of ironic, Mary's dad being of course, North Little Rock was infested with a lot of railroad people. That was the plate. Well, back in the day, you had to live close because they had the call boy.
You sure did.
That would come to your dwelling, wherever that was in the North Little Rock area, and come to your door and give you your call. So subsequently, all of the trainmen and engineers lived in the metropolitan area. A lot of people don't realize that the telephone wasn't always used for that,
No, in fact, in my time in train service out of Mineola, freight train service out of Mineola, where I stayed, that motel did not have a telephone. So, I mean, you literally took a call from a caller knocking on the door of your hotel room.
Yeah, it was the same way I stayed at Savoy there in Texarkana.
In downtown Texarkana, yeah. Yes, sir.
They come and knocked on your door there too. They certainly did. Yeah, I made a mistake the first time I ever stayed there. That I stayed on the south side, and I knew right then I was going to have to get on the north side because you switched all night with the switch.
You surely did. You surely did. I want you to tell me what, ladies and gentlemen, on the railroad, you don't have a speedometer, you have a speed recorder. And I have no idea who makes them now, but in Conductor Westbrook's in my day, they were all Barco, B-A-R-C-O, Barco speed recorders.
The industry standard, yes.
And it might still be. I'm sure it's digital now, but sure. The point is, and this didn't happen every day. I'm not trying to point a picture of reckless abandon here because that would be inaccurate. But I'm not sure the highest register needle I ever saw on a Barco speed recorder on an Amtrak passenger train. But I can tell you this. That needle was swaying. I was paying very close attention to that needle. It was like a metronome bouncing between 108 and 113. So I want to know what is the highest register you ever saw bouncing around on a Barco speed recorder?
Around 91 or 92. Okay. And that was we were up there somewhere between up there going to Poplar Bluff, up on some of that straight railroad through them farmland up there.
Right.
Had two E units, two E8s, I guess, E9s, but I was baggage man and I went through the end of the car, and the nose door of that trailing E unit went through the engine rooms of both E units and opened to the door of the lead unit. And Wayne Snodgrass was the engineer, and I thought he was going to jump out the window. That scared him half to death. But he said, "Don't do that again, boy." I said, "Where did you come?" Don't do that no more. Knock on the door, something like that. I looked at that Barco speed recorder, and like I said, it was around 91 or 92, and we were it was smooth smooth as silk. Those E units, they were, they were churning along, and man, it was great. That, but Griff is correct. The company, Amtrak and Missouri Pacific, for the most part, especially in those earlier years, they looked the other way because these engineers were safe, they were proven, they were older, and they were able to make up time and did. But they stretched the speed limit pretty good. They stretched it out there quite a bit, and nothing was ever said about it that I know of.
Our listeners and viewers may not realize it. It wasn't until after World War II that there was any federally mandated speed limit for passenger trains on the American rail system, which happens to be 79 miles per hour. That's the maximum permissible speed anywhere in the country without further technology involved. The point of the story, prior to World War II and through and including World War II, it was whatever speed the track would allow and whatever the engineer thought the track was good for.
Yeah.
So there, I just find it humorous when we talk about higher speed rail being 110 miles an hour, Jeff, because I guarantee you there were many a steam locomotive that went 110 miles an hour between Poplar Bluff, Missouri and Texarkana in its day.
Those big high driver 482s and 264s, huge drivers that were made for speed. And brother, I'm sure that they got it. Those engineers' time was a big factor. They ran a lot of passenger trains, and in the mix, here's freights and locals and such. Time was a big thing, and a lot of those men, they cut their teeth on time and whatever was required to maintain that time. If that meant burning the wheels off one of the locomotives, by gum, safely, they did it. They did it, and knew where they, like you said, where they could do that. And how times have changed, changed quite a bit. They really have. I've got a couple of things I want to, little stories to tell you about. Back November the 2nd and 3rd, 1981, I went to Texarkana. Red Muller was my conductor. I was flagman. And we had a 3-car charter coming out of Texarkana on the rear of the train.
So three private cars on the rear of the train.
Three private cars that were full of people attending the American Buddhist Association in Chicago.
I remember.
Well, we left Texarkana going Little Rock, and Red and his man voice said, "Go back there and see if you can find who's in charge of all that mess back there." He didn't want to go because our rear car, of course, we were still using steam, steam lines and stuff. We had just conventional cars. I went back there. I had to undo the gate, and on the back of that rear coach, I think at the time, and then that private car, I had to get into it. Well, I saw something when I went in there. I saw something that just really shocked me. Griff, all 3 of those cars were packed. People, when the chairs were all took up, people were sleeping in the floor. They had little pallets and stuff, and even that was the 1st of November, and it was a little warm, and, and there's no air conditioning in two of the cars. And
Oh, Lord.
anyway, I went all the way to the back end. I think it was a round in observation. I don't know if it was that car called the Reveler or what. I don't remember, but I do remember it was. I think this was maybe done by Big John. I'm not sure.
It could have been it could have been Big John's car. The Big John was the name.
Yeah, but I got all the way back through there, and there wasn't. Didn't everybody was sleeping? I couldn't. I said, well, I don't know if anybody in charge back here. So I went back up to Red and said, Red, I told him what I saw, and he said, well, we won't worry about that back there. Well, that was an eye opener. And another thing, I was conductor on December the 24th, Christmas Eve, 1983. Call for 21, go to Texarkana. It was starting to snow some. We had a short for Malvern, a man. Couldn't find him.
A passenger detraining at Malvern.
That is correct. Here I am using railroad jargon.
That's all right. That's all right.
Short means between where you get on and where you get off. It's passengers you have to get off of the train. But anyway, couldn't find him. We looked everywhere. Even looked in the baggage car, couldn't find him. Well, we stopped at Malvern, waited to whistle off and left, and got down there around Donaldson. And this guy comes staggering down the aisles of one of them coaches and said, we can hear Malvern? I said, sir, we've left. Malvern is behind us. And oh, it is. I said, yeah, we looked all over for it where you were. He had got in some little cubby hole somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where, but no, nevertheless, he missed it. And I said, we're going to stop at Arkadelphia. There is a payphone there on the platform. Would you want to get off there and get a hold of someone? Yeah, I guess so. Well, he hadn't looked outside. We pulled into Arkadelphia. It was snowing to beat 60. I'm telling you, and the wind was blowing. Well, and he didn't have but just a little old leather coat on. That's all he had, in a little small bag. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. Real, as I highballed the engineer, and as we were leaving, I looked out that Dutch door just to see this guy standing there. And of course, the train kicked up all this, snow and stuff.
Sure.
I said, man, I sure hope he. And of course, at the time of night, there's nothing. There's nobody around or anything.
No.
But I assume he got to wherever he needed to be. But yeah, left him there at Arkadelphia. But that was something I didn't like to do, but that was the next best thing to Malvern, I guess.
Well, the good news is the next trip north you made, he wasn't still on the platform at Arkadelphia.
No, much to my relief. He wasn't frozen to the platform or sitting over in one of them benches laid out or something. But I didn't hear any more about that.
Well, let me tell you, 4 decades after the fact, the gratitude from the Amtrak agent at Texarkana would have been, if you had brought him all the way into Texarkana, as some conductors would have been prone to do, we would have had to arrange for his transportation back to Malvern.
Yes.
on a cold, snowy night.
Yeah, on Christmas Eve.
On Chris, yeah, that's even when everybody
more difficult.
Especially when everybody's trying to get out of there and away from the railroad, at least for 24 hours.
Yeah, it'd been an endeavor. I'm sure it would have. Oh, one more little
No, go right ahead.
November the 10th, 1984. I was conductor going to Poplar Bluff. We were approaching BB on the East Main, two main tracks there, east and west.
BB, Arkansas.
And that's BB, Arkansas. Sailing along, pretty good clip. And all at once the train goes into emergency. And I hear it sounded like
emergency brake application.
Yes, where the engineer, we assume, initiated that. Weren't for sure, but suddenly the train comes to a fairly timely stop. As much as you can at going at that speed. But man, it sounded like at the bottom of that, every one of them cars sounded like there was somebody playing a big drum on the bottom of them cars. What in the world? Well, I got down there and got on the ground, and fireman come back there and said, and I got looking, I saw this debris and stuff. He said, we got up here and just south of that crossing, there was a motorcycle sitting in the middle of the track. We ran over a whole motorcycle. And miraculously, none that I could tell of the undercarriage of any of the cars was damaged to where, we couldn't continue. Now,
wow.
The snowplow on the front of the locomotive was bent up a little bit, but, nothing to interfere with the running of the locomotive. But man, that could have been a huge delay. Well, we were late about 40 minutes because, something like that, you're compelled to call the local authorities. And it wasn't, they called the dispatcher called, I can remember what county they had, but the county sheriff come down there and they looked around, and because by the time we got stopped, what was left of the motorcycle was south of us, behind the train. He looked around and, and looked down in the ditches and make sure nobody was around there, that someone, because the fireman said they didn't see a human being around it. It was just laying there,
Right.
But after about 40 minutes, we went on and resumed our journey. But that could have been a real trip killer right there if there had been more damage. But
wow,
a lot of little things like that. You of course, when you hit wildlife, deer, other creatures out there, that just goes along with it. And
it does.
More often than not, that doesn't, that's not a trip killer or anything like that. But you do see some strange things.
You reminded me. I think of that Buddhist train from time to time, and I'm not sure I remember it so much northbound as I remember it coming back southbound. But I do remember this at Texarkana, being alongside of those cars and hearing the chanting, because you get 300 or 400 people doing that at the same time. It can be loud even when they're inside an aluminum passenger car.
Yeah, I was not working that southbound trip, so that northbound was the only one that I got to partake of that.
Sir, tell me something, Jeff. Tell us a railroad secret. Tell us something you've always said, I need to wait till I retire before I tell that story. And if you don't have one of those readily at hand, what is it that you want posterity to know about Jeffrey Lynn Westbrook and his railroad career?
Well, to answer your first question, I guess, and it's not a secret, and then we talked about that just a few minutes ago about the passenger trains speeding I mean, it just you can label it anything you want, but they were violating the speed limits, the prescribed speed limits of passenger trains at the Missouri Pacific and UP both. Well, I know mainly the Missouri Pacific had laid out for the passenger train, but that's not so much a secret. Now, it might be a secret amongst the laymen and the general public. They were not aware. They knew the train was going fast, and unless that you knew how to clock speed with mileposts, you were probably none the wiser. Now, if you knew how to do that, you could find out right quick how fast you were going, because we still had all the mileposts. The communication poles were still in place, and you had between each mile post you had a quarter, a half, and 3/4 bands around the pole that you could clock it. But
you know who comes to mind? Baggage man Perry Holloway,
Very Holloway.
who I always got along with really well. But I'll tell you, there were a few engineers who didn't appreciate him timing them with his pocket watch and the mileposts.
I have experienced that with him. Boy, I'm telling you what, there were some heated exchanges at the end of a trip with that guy. The engineers told him, said, "You take care of your business, we'll take care of ours." And he's, well, that the whole crew is responsible. He said, "You're not going to be responsible for nothing. You're holed up in that baggage car. You don't know how fast this train's going."
That's right.
I can't remember what engineer told him that, but I thought this was going to come to blows. Telling him that over the walkie-talkie. He'd go back there and get the walkie-talkie from the conductor and tell him all that. A lot of conductors told him, said, "Going back to the baggage car, don't do this. This isn't your this isn't any of your business."
We can't let this podcast go by without mentioning the regularly assigned Arkansas Division engineer for many years to both the Inter-American and the Texas Eagle after it changed names, Paul Glover. What a gentleman. What a fine man and a fine engineer. Did you ever taste his coffee? His coffee would give you sugar diabetes.
I didn't drink coffee.
It was that sweet.
No, I never did. I'd forgotten about him.
Another man of the stature of Paul Nelson and Harold Phillips and the Wingfield boys and Lance Sullenberger, just cut from that cloth.
And Johnny Cooper, another one of the engineers, good man, just a easygoing fella, knew how to run a passenger train. Johnny Cooper was another real good one. And one of my favorites, another Gurdon man, L.B. Haney.
Yes, sir, Mr. Haney.
Mr. Speed himself.
I was just going to say, Mr. Haney was no stranger to a Barco speed recorder with the needle on the right-hand side.
Ooh, that man, he knew how to, and he was a master of air. I found that out on the freight train with him. Oh, okay, this is a secret. That doesn't involve the passenger train per se.
That's fine. That's fine.
This is a secret. I got on a train with him
with Mr. Haney.
Mr. L.B. Haney one night, and it was just he and I on the lead locomotive. We were called for one of these Z trains we had, one of these intermodal trains, and it was
which means expedited.
Yes, Z means expedited train. We had 2 SD40s, and he said, "I'm going to try something tonight, if I can." He said, "I want you to be my witness." I said, "What's that, Mr. LB?" He said, "I'm going to see if I can go from North Little Rock to Texarkana without setting the automatic brake." In other words, the train has 2 brakes. The automatic brake is the brake that controls all the brakes on all the cars in the train. And the independent brake just is for the locomotive brakes. but he said he was going to see if he could go all the way from Little Rock, Texarkana without setting the automatic brake. I'd never heard of such a thing.
Right. Yeah.
My back of my mind, I said, we can't do it. I mean, what if we need a train and we have to stop? He did it.
You must have not met anybody then.
We didn't. Well, we met one train, but he was already in the clear.
Okay.
Through Malvern, you come off that hill, off of Gifford Hill, and you go through Malvern. It's 40-mile-an-hour speed restriction to them. And we come off that hill pretty fast. I said, "How high is going to do this?" He used those automatic brakes, those engine brakes. And we went through Malvern probably about nearly 50. We took sail through there, and we went through a lot of permanent speed restrictions on different things, pushing the needle pretty far above the speed limit. But we made it without doing it, and I'm here to testify to it. I told several of my good friends out there. I said they didn't hardly believe me. I said, "Well, he did." I said,
What was your running time? Under 3 hours?
"Oh yeah,
Oh wow.
we made it in 2 hours and 48 minutes, I think."
Well, that's the passenger train running speed, timetable speed.
Now you know. We were leaning, and I was over there. I was sucking that chair up the whole way. I really was, but LB sitting over there, cool as a cucumber. Just I'll never forget that. That's men like him. Like I say, you can celebrate. A lot of them didn't maybe like, because he did speed some, but these guys were masters of their craft. They knew how to operate locomotives. They knew how to operate train air, and that, unfortunately, now is not part of the railroad jargon anymore. That is all of that skill is not there, and would not be appreciated nor tolerated nowadays.
Yeah, isn't it funny, Jeff? I saw a quote here just this last week, within the last 7 days, of a chief operating officer of one of America's largest railroads. And he said, by design, the purpose is now to sweat the assets. And so I what does that term mean? And sweating the assets means, taking them to their limit and keeping them there. And you and I come from a generation where the goal was just the opposite. You wanted everything in good order and in good repair and operating within the norms, neither too tight or too loose.
Right.
And I thought, it's just well, don't get me started. And I know you share the same thing. Precision railroading. What a what a misnomer of terminology. I'll just leave that alone. Do you remember your first trip as a passenger conductor? First trip ever?
Yes, I do. It was uneventful, to the best of my recollection here. It was I think it was in '83, Griff. It's when my first, I was always the junior man on the passenger extra board. So
right.
It was north. It was on August the 23rd, 1983. I went to Poplar Bluff, and then came back on the 24th. Apparently a unremarkable trip.
Do you remember having any trepidation about realizing, man, I'm the boss, so I'm the boss this time?
I did. Mainly it wasn't so much being the boss. I could handle the operating part, it was making sure I was going to do the transportation right,
Sure.
all the paperwork properly. I wanted to, and I'd been schooled on it, I'd been shown, but I still was nervous about that. I was fooling through those papers, and those pouches and stuff, and all of that. But yeah, and I think I had a regular crew. Conductor just laid off, so I can't remember who I had up there, but it might have been Kerry Castle, and I can't remember who the.
Wow, what a blast from the past! Another fine man. Is
Yeah,
Kerry still with us?
I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't.
I don't know. I lose contact with a lot of these,
Yeah,
and I know some of them that have passed, but I don't know about Kerry.
I don't want. I'm glad you brought up some of these older names. I don't want to leave out among the fine stature of gentlemen conductors from Hollywood Central Casting out of Little Rock, North Little Rock. And one of those, even though he would have been on the younger end of that group, I don't want to leave out Jim Henneberger.
Yeah, good guy, sharp. One of these guys always wore clothes. He was a sharp dresser.
Well, now wait a minute. Make no mistake. I don't know any dirt on you, and I don't. I wouldn't tell it if I did, but I would tell you I knew dirt on you. But I don't know any dirt on you. But listen, you cut a fine jib in a passenger conductor's uniform too. More than one young lady inquired at the ticket office, "What's that conductor? Where does he live? What's his name?"
Where is he live?
Yeah, where you and Jim Henneberger both, y'all did your uniforms proud.
Yeah,
and I know, even though I hadn't seen him for years, I know Jim's still with us, and he was also a very, very fine passenger man.
Yeah, he was. He was good at passenger work. There's my.
There it is.
That's mine.
Now I have to ask, was that an Amtrak issued punch or was that a Missouri? Okay, got it. And there are your seat checks.
Hat check, yes, yeah. Put that up there in destination day, and that's actually the Amtrak when a lot of those older conductors still had the Missouri Pacific or the TP.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Most useful items you needed.
Coach key.
Superliner coach key, because if you didn't have that, you couldn't open up that electrical cabinet downstairs to turn off different lights or check out the air conditioning, see if it kicked the breaker, or if one of the lavatories had stopped up, go down there. And I was taught how to purge those while you were moving.
And did a coat hanger come into play at any of that?
No, I didn't go on. No, it was done by air.
I got it.
And here is the manual of instructions for
conductor,
trainman, and Amtrak service. This is about, well, that's what I was issued when I got on the passenger extra board, and I've got several. Oh, here's another interesting little thing. Trainman's
meal voucher.
Yes. Very important. Very important.
Extremely important.
Half price. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sir. Yes, sir. That's when we still cook meals on the dining car. We've already had a podcast about that, and how much of that survived well into the Amtrak era. Sir, wrap us up here. I'll tell this story. Ladies and gentlemen, you're also looking at the former mayor of Tull, Arkansas. So don't think that Conductor Westbrook is just a one-trick pony. He also went into politics and was the several-term mayor of Tull, Tull, Arkansas, and you still sit on the Southwest Arkansas Economic Development Council. Do I have the name right?
Southeast Arkansas Economic Development District, which covers everything from Pine Bluff down through Gee and Monticello and over to Warren and down to Lake Village and Eudora. I'm on, in fact, here this year I've been appointed actually to the executive board of it. So that entails some more business on my part with it. But, and I did a 14-year stint as a substitute teacher over at the Bauxite High School. And I did that, which was very interesting.
What did you teach? I have to know. What did you teach?
Anything there at the high school. Anything.
Okay.
All the way from home economics to PE, and anything in between, you name it.
All right.
Yeah, very, very interesting. It was very, very interesting to say the least.
I've got one last question. I may have this wrong, and if I do, I know you'll correct me. Didn't a branch of the Missouri Pacific Railroad branch off at Gurdon and go over to through Reeder, Arkansas, where the steam operation was back in the 60s and before, or am I misremembering?
You're not misremembering. The El Dorado subdivision out of Gurdon, south of Gurdon, go through Wheeling Springs, and you get down there to Chittister and then Reeder. And there at Reeder, it had Reeder Railroad Depot. It wasn't my first, but I was forced to that job for a while. It was an undesirable job because it worked, call it midnight out of North Little Rock, and didn't get back in until the next day, 2 days later. But anyway, had interchange there at Reeder. Well, we pulled up, we had a boxcar for them. And it was daylight. We were getting kind of late, and we arrived there, Griff, and there was their steam engine sitting there, puffing and puffing. They were waiting on us with this car, and we pulled up, went through the crossover, and set it out, and we lined back up and got ready to leave. Well, they latched onto that thing and went somewhere with it, but that was the only time that I remember setting out in one other car there one time. But yeah, that was on that branch going down there to El Dorado. Sure was.
Okay. All right. Sir, what do you want posterity to know about your railroad career as we wrap up here?
Well, I enjoyed railroading. Growing up, my grandfather being a agent telegrapher with the Rock Island, and his last 25 years of his career was spent at Bauxite, and their home was right across the main line there from the depot. So I had a lot of early years of being around the railroad, I guess you'd say, and learning. Got to ride on some of the switch engines that would come down there from Biddle Yard out of Little Rock, and know some of those guys, section men. Learned, watched my grandfather not type, but work all the telegraph, being able to pick out stuff and write out train orders. And it just kind of got in my blood, and I guess I just wouldn't have none of it till I finally did hire out. And as all railroad men have free license to do, we complain a lot. We don't we, Griff? Don't we? We do complain a lot, and it doesn't have anything to do. It's not personal. It's just railroad men complain a lot, and you would think, oh, this guy, he hates this. Well, not necessarily. We maybe hate some of the things that happen at the moment, but it all comes out in the wash. But I'd just like to think that my friends and family would know that I did have a good railroad career. made a good living, had good benefits, and got good retirement, which I'm thankful for. But I did enjoy the camaraderie of so many of the men out there. It was a pleasure to do that. It was all I expected it to be and more. That's for sure. I wish that I could have. My grandfather would have been alive for me to tell him a lot of this, because he'd have got a kick out of it, to say the least. He would have liked to have heard that I did that. So yeah, I don't have necessarily a legacy, just other than just being a satisfied railroad man, I guess you would say.
Well, sir, in my book, you have a huge legacy in not only for your work in active service, but your pro bono work behind the scenes on behalf of rail passenger service regionally. I have witnessed you in those trenches doing the necessary, and everybody that rides the Amtrak's Texas Eagle today has people like you to thank for keeping it on the rails and keeping it viable and alive today. And I just want you to know, sir, what a privilege it was every moment that I had an opportunity to interact and work with you on the railroad, because it was a lot of fun, but we were all business because the passenger service came first, not second.
The public expected it.
They did expect it.
Yes, I think we delivered it. Your efforts as the agent and first line of dealing with a lot of the passengers, your demeanor and the way you handle passengers, and it's just second to none. You operated your station with so much expertise, and there was never a stone unturned. You had every T crossed and every I dotted, and whether you think you ever did or not, you did. And
well, you're kinder than I deserve, and I will give all of that credit. If there is truth in what you say, I will give all of that credit to the TNP people who trained me. And do you know, let me see, I retired from Amtrak in 2020. Do you know it wasn't until 2018 in East Texas that the final computerization of everything took away the last traces of the TNP station accounting system that I had set up at Texarkana, Marshall, and Longview. But because in the early days, that's all I knew, what I had been trained. And so consequently, Texarkana, Marshall, and Longview had the TNP bookkeeping system in-house in those operations. And not until 2018 did the last, there were just tiny traces of it left, but in 2018 it all went. And I want to leave us with this wonderful, I think it would be inappropriate not to leave it with a Gump Young story. And the reason I believe the veracity of it is because Paul Nelson and Burl Cornelius told me this story.
It's verified then, for sure.
And it's verified.
Yeah.
That on the Gurdon switcher one day at Gurdon, Arkansas, Gump captured a buzzard and tied a stick of dynamite to its legs and lit it and set that buzzard loose in the air. And I'll leave you with all I know about this story is you should have seen everybody scattered. Thank God nobody got blown up.
Very apropos, very much so. That defines the man.
That defines a man who would have a gold spray painted football helmet in case the chemical trains blew up.
Yes.
Thank you, Jeff Westbrook. Thank you, Conductor Westbrook. Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. You're part of the legacy of the American Railroad heritage. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being my friend and joining us on the podcast today.
Well, I'm just so honored, Griff, and thank you for being my friend, and thank you for being such an ardent champion of passenger railroading, especially down in this region of the country. Without your help, a lot of things would not have happened, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for that.
God bless you, sir. I'll leave you with this railroad mantra. Quote unquote, you still working for the railroad? Everybody I owe money to sure the hell hopes I am. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Griff. Take care.
Texas Eagle Way, the way to and from and all points beyond. www.texaseagle.y'all. Come on the way, the Texas Eagle Way, through the heart of the nation, a traveling sensation. Get your